Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's From the Field Farm Chat with Idaho Wheat. My name is Ryan Mortensen. I am the Communications and Programs Manager for the Idaho Wheat Commission, and thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, just a couple of reminders. We love and welcome questions or comments throughout our discussion today. If you want to ask a question, make a comment. If you'll just take yourself off mute or use the raise your hand icon, we'll make sure to get that question or comment addressed for our speaker today. So I want to welcome Clark Mather to our podcast today. Clark is the Executive Director of Northwest River Partners Organization up in Oregon, Washington.
8 states. Coming in an airplane or car near you. Yeah.
So I want to welcome Clark and appreciate him being with us today to talk about the importance of hydropower and the dams and why they exist and why they are beneficial specifically to our Idaho wheat industry. So Clark, if you don't mind, I'll just turn the time over to you for an introduction about who you are, what you do as Executive Director, and what Northwest River Partners is.
Yeah, well, Ryan, thanks for having me, and thanks to Brittany and the Commission for putting this together. Great to be with all of you today. So, as Ryan said, I'm Clark Mather. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest River Partners, and we have over 100 members across the Pacific Northwest that are really focused on advocating and educating about the multiple purposes that come from the hydropower system. Yes, hydropower is a big, important value that comes from the system. But of course, the system has multiple authorized purposes from Congress, but also just every day people know how important that system is for river transportation, irrigated agriculture, and all of that. And our membership, yes, is mostly the consumer-owned utilities in Idaho, and again, stretching across 8 states overall in the Northwest. But we also have a more diverse membership in terms of having members like the Port of Lewiston, the Idaho Grain Producers Association, Schweitzer Engineering Labs, IBEW Local 77, and others that we think really represent the broad coalition of people that depend on the system and support the system and want to work with the Commission and Northwest River Partners, PNWA, and others to support the system and make sure that it's still there for generations to come, as it served the Northwest so well for decades now in the region. So our team is out talking. We appreciate this chance to talk with some of our friends in Idaho and then in the Northwest about how important the hydropower system is. But we're out every day across the region trying to, again, spread the value of the hydropower system to educate people and hopefully to drive better public policy across the Northwest and in DC and even in local governments where we need to make sure that that system is understood and protected by policy and that people understand how integral the whole system is to their everyday lives in the region.
Speaking, kind of piggybacking on your comment about education, for our listeners who may not be familiar, can you just give a brief explanation? What are the Columbia Snake River dams and why were they originally constructed?
Yeah, I mean, so the idea of building dams on the Columbia Snake River is really started at least in the early 20th century, but really the main construction period of those dams started in the early 1940s, and then Lower Granite Dam, which is the most upriver of the 4 federal dams on the Snake River, that was completed and put in operation in 1975. And again, those dams serve multiple purposes. Yes, hydropower, very, very big, important part of this. I'm sure we'll talk the fact that hydropower provides roughly half of the electricity across the Pacific Northwest and is half of the available capacity. So not only does it provide that on a every 4-second basis to consumers across the region, but if you turned on all the generating capacity in the region, so if you had all the wind blowing, the coal plants that we have left, natural gas facilities, nuclear plant in Washington State, hydropower would still provide roughly half of that energy too. So it is the foundational energy resource in the region. But again, when you think about all the things that have come besides the hydropower aspect of it. So hundreds of thousands of acres are irrigated because of that system, not only in Idaho, but in places like the Columbia Basin Project in Washington State, in Oregon along the river. And maintaining those river levels where they're at is really important, given the significant investments that irrigated growers have made in their pumping infrastructure. And I was reminded earlier this year, I had a chance to speak with some irrigators out in Hermiston, especially in the summertime when it's so hot in Idaho and across the region. If you lose power and your pumps can't work, you might lose your crop for the year. And that could affect food security and supply. So that power irrigated ag nexus is really, really important. They're also important for that river transportation system, the 465 miles that is enabled by the 4 dams on the lower Columbia River with navigation locks, and then the 4 dams with navigation locks in the Snake River that go all the way up to Lewiston, Idaho. If I didn't mention it, Scott Corbett in the Port of Lewiston is one of our members. That's hugely important because Idaho, as I understand it, exports roughly half of your wheat out into markets in the region. $600 million worth of wheat or maybe more is grown in Idaho. Half of that goes out mostly through that system, I would guess. And having that river transportation gateway is really important from an efficiency standpoint. It's important from a cost standpoint. It's important from an emission standpoint. I mean, the barging transportation system we have is a fraction of what it would be, and from a cost, reliability, and emission standpoint versus moving it by truck. So that's a really important benefit. And of course, there's the dams, particularly on some of the dams on the Columbia River provide major flood control, which protects even the river port infrastructure as you move down the river. There's recreational benefits, all those things. And so the hydropower system and the investments we've made in it are really, they're interwoven into the Northwest. And we are out there working with the commission and others to try and educate people and to protect that system and look for opportunities maybe to grow it in terms of more energy capacity, providing more efficiency on the system, working to protect salmon, which is obviously a big issue on the system, and we're working very hard on all those things.
And speaking about benefits of barging, I have a little infographic here I was looking at. So just to put it in perspective, one 4-barge tow on the Columbia Snake River system is equivalent to 144 rail cars or 538 semi-trucks on the highway. I mean, so you're talking huge economic or benefits of barging.
Yeah, and most of our members are consumer-owned utilities that are mainly interested in the hydropower, but oftentimes when we're out doing presentations throughout the Northwest, we start with a slide on barging because, number one, the Columbia River is a massive river, and a lot of people, their experience is driving up one of the highways that borders on it, and then when they see those barges going up the Columbia or Snake River, it's hard to imagine the scale. And so when you tell people that a 4-barge tow keeps 500 semi-truck trailers off the road and enables them to have a more free and safe transportation for them and their families, and by the way, provides cheaper food, helps our trade balance, all those things, you can see the light bulb going off with people. And then when they get a chance to see one of those, I had a chance to talk with Scott Corbett at the Port of Lewiston and Kristen Mira, who works for American Cruise Lines. This cruise boat industry, which is growing in, this lock system is fascinating to people. I just had a chance to go through a lock for the first time last year. That is huge, not only just from a unique perspective in the region, but obviously integral in getting your wheat from Idaho out to market in an efficient way, and frankly, to feed people that desperately need it around the world that rely on Idaho wheat and Northwest wheat for their everyday needs.
So with the push we're hearing about renewable energy, how do hydroelectric projects like these fit into the larger energy landscape?
So first of all, we believe that hydropower is the world's oldest renewable, and we benefited from having that renewable energy source in the region. Dating back to the 19th century, the first federal dam went into operation in 1938 at Bonneville Dam. So we've had a very renewable, clean, affordable system since those dams have been in place. We're also interested in bringing new resources, and frankly, the region badly needs them. So there was just a report that came out from a group, E3 Consultants, very reputable consulting firm, and they basically said that we need to find 9 gigawatts, that's 9,000 megawatts of energy capacity in a little more than 5 years in the region to meet growing energy needs. Data centers are becoming a growing usage in the region. And so we're going to need wind, solar. There's a big effort to develop nuclear projects. And we would argue that we cannot degrade the hydropower system anymore, as has been done by policy, particularly over the last few years. Just since, say, 2018, 2019, we have turned down the output of the federal hydropower system by reducing energy from spill, that by enough power to electrify 250,000 homes in the region. And we've done that in the name of protecting fish species in the region. And yet there has not been an appreciable increase in the smolt to adult return. So again, just to remind your listeners, most young fish are born, most salmon are born in freshwater, the smolts, young juvenile fish. They take a year or two to get out to the ocean. They spend most of their time in the ocean, and it's those adult returns that we're most interested in driving up the numbers for. And even with that additional spill, we have not seen an appreciable increase. In fact, particularly in the snake river system for Chinook and steelhead, we've actually seen a decrease in those the percentage of adult returns to the young fish going out. And so one of the things we're focused on is bringing that perspective to this conversation and trying to find different things that we can do to support salmon returns and look for opportunities to increase hydropower production in the region. And oh, by the way, that spill impacts the river transportation system as well. And, if you're spilling a lot of water, it can impact the abilities for barges to operate in that system. And so can we find some different things, either through new technologies at dams, more efficient, more fish-safe turbine technologies, other things that we can do working together as a region to have this very important multi-purpose hydropower system be robust and protected,
Sure.
But also continue our work to bring back salmon in the region.
Okay, so I'm going to go there since you brought it up.
Please.
We know that there's a lot of opposition out there towards the dams, specifically with reference to the salmon population. How do the dams balance these environmental concerns like salmon population, fish population in general, and river ecosystems with human need?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm going to bet that your members, people across the Northwest, my organization, Northwest River Partners, we all care about salmon. We are all invested in bringing salmon back to the region. And we're also invested in protecting this system, this hydropower system, this multi-purpose river transportation system that we've all benefited from. And we would say that there's lots of evidence that you can have both. So one of the things that we have been sharing publicly, and we'd love to work with the commission even more to talk about this, is that salmon and steelhead returns have tripled into the federal system since the first federal dam was built in 1938. And this is not our data. This is data from people. If you don't know, there are literally people counting fish, counting the adult fish that spend some time out in the ocean and are returning up these federal dams and counting every fish. And there is a belief that at one point there was 5 or 10 or 15 or more million fish that returned to the Columbia and Snake Rivers. But for lots of reasons, in 1938, when the first federal dam went into operation, with a lock, by the way, at Bonneville Dam, 456,000 fish returned that year. Not a million, not 5, not 10 million. And so if you flash forward to last year, 1.77 million fish returned, that's almost 3.9 times higher. And if you take the average over the last few years, you've got 3 times as many salmon and steelhead returning. That does not mean that we think our work is done. Electric customers in the region are investing hundreds of millions of dollars every year to continue improving the system and mitigating the hydropower system's impact on fish. We have been actively working to reach out to sovereign tribes, including the Nez Perce tribe, which is obviously based in the state of Idaho, but has historic fishing, hunting, and gathering areas that expand far beyond the state into the broader Northwest, and others to see where we can find solutions on those things. And I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that everything's perfect, because it's not. There are certainly some smaller stocks of salmon that are struggling, but we think that we can work together to find those solutions to keep our hydropower system, that clean, affordable, reliable source of energy, going, that's so important in the Northwest, keep that river transportation system going, support your members and helping them have this certainty during all of these challenging times with low market prices, uncertainty on trade, all those things, that they can keep farming and encourage the next generation to keep farming, which is vital from a food security economic standpoint in Idaho and the Northwest. So we want to find those solutions so we can work together to move everyone forward in the region. And we think there's lots of opportunities to do that.
We know that the current administration has put a pause on the ongoing process of breaching the dams. It's currently on a pause. Do you foresee challenges and or opportunities in the coming years, coming decades, with regard to the Columbia and Snake River dams?
So I forgot to say one thing on your earlier question, Ryan. So one of the things I also want to share with folks, and I will answer this question too, the vast majority of people in the Northwest support the hydropower system.
Sure.
75% of people in Idaho support the hydropower system in our most recent survey. We've done surveys roughly every year or two for the last few years. That number has stayed the same. 3 in 4 people in the broader Northwest support hydropower. In fact, 79% of people in Washington support the hydropower system. And we see that on a bipartisan basis, no matter what side of the Cascades, what part of the region you're in, people support the hydropower system. And so there has been a loud, well-funded message on the other side of this conversation for many decades. And so if you just saw that message, you would think that there is a broad constituency that supports breaching. There isn't. The vast majority of people support the system and understand how important it is. And in fact, Idaho, among the 4 Northwest states, 40% of people in Idaho think that hydropower is the most important electric generating resource. Again, that's the biggest percentage among the 4 states. So in Idaho, certainly, and across the Northwest, people understand how important the system is. In terms of what's happened in this administration, yes, the Trump administration has taken some steps to identify the importance of baseload energy, that is energy available when you need it, like hydropower, and has identified hydropower as a baseload energy resource. The Trump administration did end an agreement from the Biden administration, and because of that, several of the historic plaintiffs in that long-standing court case, which I think dates back to something like 2001, I was just talking with someone about this, so it's decades long, they're starting that litigation again. And so there is a lot of uncertainty about what the future of that system will look like. And we believe, and we have been pushing policymakers and regional leaders, again, can we have a conversation in the Northwest where we identify those solutions to move us forward on fish, to work with sovereign tribes to identify initiatives that lead to attainment of their historic tribal treaty rights, and how can we move all those things forward and also protect the core values of the hydropower system that provide millions of people with benefits around the region. So yes, the administration's taken some very important steps to protect hydropower, but there are several other things happening, particularly in the states of Washington and Oregon, where they are implementing a temperature regulation that could impact the federal dams in Idaho, the federal dams in Washington and other parts of the federal system that I think everyone should be paying attention to and being engaged in as well. And I'm happy to talk more about that if that's interesting.
Yeah. Carrie, thanks for joining. Go ahead. Do you have a question or comment?
Sure. Thank you. I've noticed in these conversations that something's always left out. tribe, and it's my understanding now they have exclusive commercial harvest fishing rights for salmon on the Columbia River system. And I believe in Zone 6, the prime 140-mile stretch of the river is where they have their commercial harvest rights. And what comes to my mind is what other endangered species is allowed to be commercially harvested? And shouldn't this be also part of the discussion before any more talk of dam breaching? Go ahead.
Well, you cut out a little bit there, Carrie, but I think you're just talking about broader harvest. And the point you're making is that you can't, and certainly we can't think of another ESA listed species where we allow harvest on those species. Is that right? Was that the crux of your question?
Well, yes, the tribes, and in my area, the Nez Perce tribe, has always been pushing, very vocal in court, to have dams breached, the 4 lower Snake River dams. But at the same time, they are commercially harvesting salmon on the prime 140-mile stretch in Zone 6, as I understand. And so, in my mind, this should be part of the discussion when it comes to dam breaching. What other species, endangered species, is allowed to be commercially harvested? And maybe there should be a temporary pause on commercial harvest and wait and see what the fish numbers look like then. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, we certainly think that harvest of all types should be part of this conversation. In fact, one of the things that we've noticed is that this year in particular, the harvest seasons on stocks like spring Chinook, which my understanding, that's a very culturally important stock for several tribes in the region, they've actually been expanded in terms of the length of time because there's actually more spring Chinook coming into the system than forecasters predicted. And then when you look, if you kind of zoom out even more to the West Coast and you look at a river like the Yukon River, where the first dam in the Yukon River is more than 1,000 miles into Canada as it flows from Alaska into Canada, there has been severe fishing restrictions. And my understanding, very little, if no, harvest is allowed by humans on that river. And so when you think about what's happening here in the Columbia and Snake River system, where we're talking about breaching these vital facilities, at the same time we're expanding fishing seasons, I mean, some of that really doesn't line up. And what we think it points to is that we're having some success here in the region to restore these fish through different means that we've done to improve the system, better hatchery practices and other things. And yet still, I want to get to the other part of harvest here, the non-human harvest is having a huge impact on salmon as well. We think we should come together and work together as a region to help solve these problems. Harvest by birds, particularly as juvenile salmon go out. There was a report earlier this year that something like 15 or 20% of the juvenile steelhead are getting eaten by birds. And now you have pelicans that are flying into the system and taking these adult sockeye salmon and literally just scooping them up in their big beaks and taking them right out of the fish ladders in the hydro system. I mean, these fish that are, have had to survive all of these things. Most of the threats are out in the ocean, and they've returned, and we've got this growing bird population, never mind sea lions and other predators. So yes, harvest is a really big concern, both from humans and from animals. And we should have a conversation about what the impacts of all those things are. And that's part of our point, right? I mean, it is not just the dams that impact salmon. Overharvest in the late 19th and early 20th centuries is very well documented. I was just looking at a website this morning on this. It's it's very well documented that overharvest by humans during that period really led to the 456,000 number in 1938 at Bonneville Dam. And so all of those things should be considered. It shouldn't just be a focus on the dams. We should look at the whole life cycle of salmon to understand how we address this very complex set of challenges.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Gary. Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
In switching gears, Clark, thank you for that information about the fish population. Switching gears a little bit, let's go back to your take on how do these dams support agriculture, specifically Idaho agriculture. How do these dams support agriculture, and can you explain how the dams improve irrigation, how the dams benefit farmers, just an overall picture of the dams and their benefit to our wheat farmers?
Yeah, I mean, again, having that river transportation system, I think, is really, really important. Not a Idaho wheat farmer per se, but the Washington Association of Wheat Growers, Michelle Hennings, is a member, and she has been a huge advocate, like all of you, supporting the system. And we had her on our podcast, and she has a small farm herself, and talked about, in December, and I understand prices haven't changed a lot. The price at that point was around $5.25, $5.50 a bushel, and her break-even price was like $7.50, $8 a bushel. And so if you start adding costs on transportation, or you create more uncertainty, or give her the flexibility to meet markets where it's most advantageous to a farmer like Michelle and those in Idaho, you're really causing a problem economically for farmers to stay in business. And there was an analysis about a year ago that something like 14 farms a week in Washington had gone out of business. And it's not surprising given the challenges that wheat farmers have faced on price. And then again, all the trade uncertainty that's happening, where again, most of, half of Idaho wheat, as I understand it, is exported. And so when you have an international trade system, which is being remade during this time, that does create uncertainty. And when you're adding costs or creating uncertainty in terms of river transportation, and then all the inflationary pressures you've seen from other input costs, fuel, fertilizer, all those things that go into running a farm and doing it at a high level, it's hugely challenging. And so again, when you think about this system that we have built, and you think about that there's so much excess capacity we could have on the system in terms of available barging traffic, and you think about how efficient it is, and the infrastructure in terms of elevators and the Lewis Clark Terminal in Lewiston, all those things that have been put in place around this system, we just can't afford, from a food security standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a national security standpoint, to weaken the ability for farmers, including the Idaho wheat farmers, to stay in business. It's essential, and people don't understand how critical the agricultural sector is in all the states in the Northwest, particularly Idaho. I saw a stat from the Idaho Department of Agriculture. It's something, agribusiness is like a fifth of Idaho's gross domestic product. I mean, that is tremendous. Yeah. And it's the same story in Washington and Oregon, and I assume Montana. And so agriculture is a huge part of the economy. And if you start chipping away at it by degrading the system and creating more uncertainty for farmers that are barely hanging on, you're going to have an economic impact, a food security impact, and the Northwest is going to look much, much different than it does today.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question here, Clark. Advice for farmers on how they can support or get involved in supporting the Columbia Snake River dam system.
Yeah, well, I'm going
to be a dam hero.
Yeah, well, I think we all have an obligation to be dam heroes. I'm going to put our website here in the chat, so feel free to go to ourpowerswater.org and sign up for our newsletter updates and all of that. We really need everybody to engage in this conversation with your policymakers, your congressional delegation, your governor, everyone to voice how important these issues are. Northwest River Partners, we have almost 100 members in the region. We have several great members in Idaho. We'd love to have the commission as a member someday. But regardless, we all have to unite together to bring these issues to the forefront of policymakers' minds. And we can do that talking, and we're happy to do that, but it's never more powerful than when it is the farmer or the local potato grower or Schweitzer Engineering Labs or the local labor union that is bringing their perspective about why these issues around the hydropower system are so important. So sticking together, I love the dam hero term. I know that people like Leslie Druffel and Scott and others have kind of coined that term over the years, but I think we all have that obligation now because this is a really critical time. The dams, I've been involved in these conversations for 20 or 25 years. The future of the hydropower system has never been under more threat than it is today. And we just cannot afford to let our guard down. We need to stay active. We need to advocate for the system we all depend on.
All right. Clark Mather, thank you very much for that information. Appreciate your time and coming and joining us today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
To our listeners, just a reminder that the recording of this podcast will be posted to all of our social media platforms as well as our website, our YouTube and Spotify channels. So be looking for that to share with friends and neighbors. And then we will meet you all right back here next time for our next one.